In 2022, a travel vlogger from England named Emily Carter arrived in Colorado for a special mission, to make a video about the most haunted hotel in America. Her goal was clear: the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, a classic colonial-style hotel that inspired the novel The Shining. The large white building with tall windows stood proudly at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, holding a long history and chilling stories. Emily, a young woman aged 28 with blonde hair and sharp green eyes, did not believe in ghost stories. In fact, she wanted to prove that all the tales about the Stanley Hotel were just sensationalism. When she arrived at the lobby, the day was nearing dusk. The golden light reflected off the marble floor, and an old chandelier glimmered dimly. A middle-aged woman behind the reception desk greeted her. "Are you Emily Carter?" the woman asked with a thin smile. "Yes, that's me," Emily replied kindly. "Room 217, yes." "Here's the key," she said, handing over an old metal key, not an electronic card. Emily flinched. "Room 217? Supposedly the most haunted one?" The receptionist nodded slowly. "Many like that room. The aura is strong." Emily chuckled softly, then glanced at her camera, which was recording. "Well guys, it seems I got this special room tonight." The stairs creaked softly as Emily ascended. The deep red carpet covered the steps, and the walls were adorned with old paintings. As she walked, her footsteps echoed, but gradually she heard another step following behind. She stopped and turned around. "Empty." "Hello?" she asked quietly. No answer. When she reached the door of room 217, she took a deep breath. The key turned with some difficulty, but the door finally opened. A cold breeze immediately swept in, even though the heater was on. A scent of lavender mixed with old wood filled the room. Classic, luxurious, and somehow a little frightening. "This is it, the legendary room 217, she murmured while recording. "Where Stephen King stayed and supposedly where the Stanley's wife often appears." Emily placed GoPro cameras in two corners, one facing the bed, the other facing a tall mirror in the corner. Then she sat on the bed, daring. "If there's anyone here, show yourself." Suddenly, click. The door she had just closed and locked slowly opened a crack. The hinges creaked softly. Emily froze. She got up and walked toward the door. There was no one in the hallway. She closed and locked it again, this time harder. "It must be the wind," she said, trying to calm herself. She sat back down and played the recording from earlier when she was going up the stairs. Her eyes narrowed. On the video, as she looked back, there was a faint figure at the end of the hallway. Tall, faceless, like a shadow of a human, standing still watching her. Emily's heart pounded. She looked toward the mirror in the corner. Nothing. But when she checked the second camera facing the mirror, her body stiffened. The shadow was now standing inside the mirror, motionless, facing the bed, where Emily was sitting now. Night slowly fell, bringing the cold air from the Rocky Mountains creeping through the cracks of the old windows. Room 217 was wrapped in silence. Only the ticking of the old clock's hands on the cabinet and the soft breath of the wind swaying the thin curtain beside the bed could be heard. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, slightly hunched forward, staring at her laptop screen that had just recorded clips from the static cameras. Her gaze was fixed. The figure was still there. In the footage, when she stood in front of the mirror, another shadow stood a few steps behind her. Tall, faint, like someone covered in mist. The figure did not move, did not turn, but also did not disappear. "This isn't my own shadow," she whispered softly. Emily rose, holding her small camera, and approached the tall mirror standing in the corner of the room. She saw her own reflection, hair loose, dark hoodie, eyes looking a bit pale. But there was nothing behind her. "Hello," she said quietly. "If you really are here, I don't mean to disturb. I'm just staying one night. After that, I'll leave." She stood in front of the mirror for a moment. Silence. Then, from behind, she heard a faint sound like nails scratching wood. The sound came from the old wooden wardrobe in the corner of the room. "Grr, grr." Emily turned quickly. No movement, but the sound continued. Slowly she approached. Each step felt heavy, as if held back by the increasingly cold air. She stood in front of the wardrobe, putting her ear to the door. Silence. The. 3 soft knocks from inside. Emily bit her lip. Her left hand trembled as she reached for the wardrobe handle. She slowly pulled the door open. Empty. But one hanger inside moved on its own, as if just touched. Emily jumped back and fell into the chair behind her. The chair collapsed with a loud noise, making the wood sound echo in the room. She sat on the floor, gasping. "What is this?" For several minutes she just sat, staring at the still open wardrobe, Then she lifted her camera again, turned on recording mode, and aimed it back at the mirror. The mirror now looked normal, just reflecting herself. But something felt wrong. Emily leaned closer. If there's something you want to show, now's the time. Show yourself now. The mirror remained silent. But from the lower reflection, a small shadow darted behind her, like a child. Soft giggling followed. Hee hee hee. Emily spun around quickly. The room's hallway was empty. She raised her camera upward, shining it at the ceiling. There was a faint handprint, like a small child's hand, pressed on the surface of the ceiling, barely visible, as if just pressed from inside. She bent down, wanting to leave. But as her foot touched the floor, she saw another shadow in the mirror, not hers nor any object's shadow. The figure sat on the bed, beside where she had been sitting earlier. Its head bowed, long hair covering the face. Emily turned to the bed. Empty. But when she looked back at the mirror, the figure was now looking at her. A white face, empty eyes, and a wide torn mouth, as if silently laughing. Morning greeted Estes Park with bright sunlight and friendlier air. The fog had lifted, birds chirped outside, and the Stanley Hotel looked like an ordinary retreat for tourists seeking peace. But not for Emily. She sat on a wooden chair near the window, a steaming cup of black coffee in her hands. Her eyes were still red. She hadn't slept all night. Yet now, with the bright light pouring into her room, she began to doubt everything that happened last night. Maybe I'm just tired, she whispered. Maybe it was all visual hallucinations. Could be shadows, reflections, or I'm just overthinking after watching too many horror movies. Emily opened her laptop, pulling up the video recording from the night before. She rewatched it from the start, trying to find logical explanations. Some parts did look strange, especially the moments when the shadow appeared in the mirror or when knocking sounds came from the wardrobe. But in the dim lighting and her exhausted state, she started to consider. Maybe the camera caught my silhouette from another reflection, and the wardrobe might just be creaking on its own. Old houses always have sounds. Yet there was one thing that kept bothering her. The figure in the mirror. She zoomed in on the part of the video where the figure appeared sitting on the bed. The shadow did not mimic her movements. Not reflective. In fact, its sitting position faced the opposite way. It wasn't a mirror. It was like a window to somewhere else. Feeling she needed more answers, Emily decided to leave her room. She walked down to the lobby and found a middle-aged woman tidying travel brochures at the reception desk. Her name tag read, Marcia. Excuse me, Mrs. Marcia. I'm a guest from room 217, Emily greeted politely. Marcia nodded and smiled warmly. Oh yes, that's a favorite room for history explorers. What? Is there something I can help with? Emily hesitated briefly, then asked, Last night? I experienced some strange things. May I ask, does that room have a history? Marcia's smile faded slightly. Her eyes narrowed, then she looked down. Room 217 is one of the oldest rooms. There was a gas explosion there back in 1911. A housekeeper named Elizabeth Wilson almost lost her life there. She survived. Emily asked quickly. Physically, yes, Marcia replied softly. But after that, she never returned to how she was before. Many say her spirit still lingers to ensure guests keep things tidy. Emily chuckled softly, trying to lighten the mood. So, the one who threw the hanger around might be Miss Elizabeth the perfectionist? Marcia did not laugh. If it were just Elizabeth, maybe you'd only find your blanket fixed. But you said you experienced some strange things? What do you mean? Emily fell silent. She felt she shouldn't discuss it further. She only said, the mirror in the room sometimes reflects something that isn't in the room. Marcia's face hardened. She looked at Emily seriously. That mirror is not original to the room. It was added in 1985 after renovations. But several guests have said the same thing. Emily's eyes widened. They have. Marcia lowered her voice to a whisper. They say the mirror is like an eye. Sometimes it sees things that we cannot. Feeling chills run down her spine again, Emily nodded slowly and excused herself to return to her room. In the hallway, her steps slowed. Everything felt normal in the daylight. Sunlight shone on the red carpet and white walls adorned with old paintings. But in her mind, logic started to crack. If it wasn't fatigue, if it wasn't shadows, and if it wasn't just a myth, what she saw last night was real. In front of the door of room 217, Emily paused. She looked at the number on the door, then took a deep breath. I have to know the answer, she whispered. Whatever happens tonight, I have to find out. The second night in room 217. This time, Emily decided to stay awake longer. She didn't want to be startled by strange occurrences like the night before. The mirror in the corner of the room was now covered with a white sheet, neatly tied at all four corners. She no longer wanted to see any reflections. Tonight she just wanted to sleep, or at least, not be haunted. The clock on the wall showed 11 p.m. Its ticking sounded soft and steady, as if counting down to something unknown. Emily sat on the bed, headphones on, playing calm instrumental music. The bedside lamp glowed dimly, spreading a warm light across the room. 15 minutes, then 30 minutes passed. Nothing happened. But just as she began to feel a little calmer, the bedside lamp suddenly went out. Click. Total darkness. Emily, startled, took off her headphones and fumbled for the switch. She tried turning it back on. Nothing. The main lights were out too. Power outage, she murmured. But no. From the window, she could still see the garden lights glowing outside the hotel. That meant only her room was dark. Emily took out a flashlight from her bag and turned it on. The small circular beam illuminated the corners of the room. She directed it to the ceiling, the walls, the door. Everything looked normal. Until she heard knocking sounds from the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. Softly, 3 times right outside her door. She turned quickly, shining the flashlight at the dark brown wooden door. Tap, tap. This time louder. Emily swallowed hard. Who would come knocking at this hour? She stood up and slowly approached the door, pressing her ear against its surface. "Hello?" she whispered. No answer. Then, the door handle slowly turned on its own. Slowly. The creaking of old metal sent a shiver through Emily's chest. She stepped back 2 paces. But the door didn't open. Only the handle moved, then stopped. Silence thickened again. Suddenly, breathing sounds came from beneath the door. Like someone crouching outside, watching through the crack. Emily quickly covered her mouth with her hand, holding her breath. She switched off the flashlight, crouched down, and crawled under the bed. She hid there, behind the fabric curtains and bed legs, her heart pounding fiercely. But strangely, a few seconds later, the bedroom door creaked open slowly. The hinges squeaked, sliced through the quiet. Emily held her breath. She could see a small gap from under the bed. Someone's foot stepped in. A bare foot. Well, no footwear. The steps were slow, dragging, and sounded wet, like feet that had just come out of water. The footsteps moved toward the middle of the room, then stopped. Then, reversed direction toward the bed. Emily closed her eyes, praying silently. The foot was now near the side of the bed. Then, without a sound, knelt down. As if trying to look beneath. Emily couldn't bear it. She held her breath as deeply as possible, her body stiff as stone. And then, a very faint voice whispered, "I know you're there." The voice sounded like a whisper underwater. Long, heavy, inhuman. Emily wanted to scream but couldn't. Then suddenly loud knocks echoed again on the outer door. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps she had just heard stood up immediately and walked quickly toward the door. But when Emily peeked from under the bed, there was no one there. The room lights flickered back on. The door closed again, and Emily stayed under the bed, trembling. Whatever that was, it was no ordinary hotel guest. That morning, the sun shone brightly over Estes Park. But no amount of sunlight could erase the dark shadows from the night before. Emily sat in the lobby of the Stanley Hotel, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep. The cup of coffee in her hand remained untouched. She stared blankly toward the reception desk, where a male staff member was busy noting guest bookings. After a few hesitant moments, Emily stood and approached the receptionist. "Excuse me, I would like to see the CCTV footage of the hallway outside room 217 from last night," she said softly but firmly. The staff raised his eyebrows, surprised, then gave a polite smile. "Is there a problem, miss?" Emily took a breath. "Someone entered my room last night. I don't know who, but I'm sure they weren't a normal guest." The staff seemed to think for a moment, then gestured for Emily to follow him. They walked to a small room behind the lobby, the monitoring room. There were several small screens showing various angles of the hotel. "What time did it happen?" the staff asked. "Around 11 p.m. to past midnight," Emily replied quickly. He nodded and began to play the footage from that night. They fast-forwarded to 11 p.m. The footage showed the hallway on the second floor. Silent. No one was there. 11:15, 11:30, 11:45. The hallway remained empty. Emily grew anxious. "Please, slow it down. There should be someone standing outside my door." They knocked and came in. The staff complied. They slowed the video and zoomed in on the front of room 217. Then, Something that made Emily's hair stand on end happened. At 11:53 p.m., her door opened, by itself, slowly, without anyone in front of the door. No hand turning the handle, no figure knocking. The door just opened on its own. Emily held her breath. "Try rewinding a bit more," she urged quickly. They rewound to the minutes before. No one passed through the hallway. No strange figure. No bare feet. No shadow. Completely empty. But what was more terrifying was what happened after the door opened. From inside the room, something seemed to come out. The camera couldn't capture its shape clearly, only static interference, strange noise crossing the lens. But it was clear enough that the shadow moved toward the camera, then vanished. The staff now looked pale. He stared at Emily in disbelief. This is strange. Our cameras are usually stable. But I've never seen interference like this." Emily just nodded slowly, her body trembling. "So, no one came to my room?" "No. No one passed by that hallway all night. But the door did open by itself." Emily turned her gaze toward the small window in the CCTV room. The sunlight looked normal, but in her eyes, everything was no longer normal. Whoever, or whatever, came to her room, was not human. And now, knowing the door opened without cause, Emily realized, maybe that creature didn't come from outside, but from inside that very room. The Colorado sky was so clear that afternoon, but Emily's heart remained dark. After leaving the CCTV room, she walked quickly to her room, packed her small bag and went back down to the hotel lobby. She didn't want to stay alone in room 217 any longer. Even the sunlight wasn't enough to erase the shadows lingering in the corners of her mind. While waiting for her second cup of coffee at the hotel's small cafe, Emily opened her laptop. She began searching for more information about the Stanley Hotel and, more specifically, about room 217. And then everything started to make sense, but in a way far from comforting. Room 217 was known as the most haunted room in the Stanley Hotel. Emily found articles from local websites, mystery blogs, and even documentary videos. She read that in 1911, a chambermaid named Elizabeth Wilson had almost died in a gas explosion in room 217. Miraculously, she survived, but ever since then, many guests claimed to see an old woman who liked to tidy their clothes, turn on the lights, or even stand at the foot of their bed at night. But what made Emily's hair stand on end was a note in the hotel's guest book. A guest in 2003 had written, "I woke up at 2 a.m. and saw someone pacing back and forth in the hallway. When I opened my door to speak to them, the hallway was empty. But my room's door, it shut itself behind me and I was locked out. The management found no evidence anyone passed by. I will never return." Then another entry from 2015. "I stayed in room 217 and felt someone sitting at the foot of my bed. I thought it was my wife, but she was in the bathroom. When I turned on the light, there was no one there." Emily took a deep breath and closed her laptop. What she experienced last night was not unique. She was only one of many guests who felt something in that room. However, not all disturbances were from Elizabeth Wilson, the chambermaid. There were darker reports. Some guests described the same nightmare, being trapped in a small, windowless room, seeing a faceless figure standing in the corner. Some even claimed to hear crying coming from inside the closet, or from under the bed. Emily sat frozen. Then she remembered the wet bare feet that entered her room. None of the reports mentioned that. Could it be not Elizabeth's spirit? Could there be another entity, something unrecorded, unmentioned, and untold? Her thoughts began drifting elsewhere. The Stanley Hotel was famous not only for its long history but also for inspiring Stephen King when writing The Shining. King himself had stayed in room 217 and fled that same night after experiencing disturbances. Emily stared out the cafe window, where she could see the hotel's grand architecture, now somehow feeling even more ominous. She began speaking to herself. If even King ran away that night, why am I still here? But she knew the answer because she had to know more. Had to know what really was in that room. Not for content, not for followers, not for sensation, but because her curiosity was slowly turning into obsession. And somehow she knew, tonight room 217 would call her again. That night, the atmosphere in the Stanley Hotel felt different. Quiet, yet filled with whispers unheard by ordinary ears. Emily stood in front of room 217, clutching the key in her trembling hand. Her breath steamed in the cold Estes Park air, but her heart raced wildly. "This is the last time," she whispered to herself. She slowly opened the door. A musty, cold smell greeted her. The room's light was dim. Only a single lamp on the table emitted a faint glow. Emily stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. Suddenly, a soft rustling sound came from the corner of the room. Emily froze. She turned toward the sound. Nothing was there. But the shadow in that corner began to move slowly, forming a vague shape. It looked like an old woman with empty eyes and skin pale as paper. Emily swallowed hard. "Who are you?" Her voice trembled. The figure did not answer. But from its mouth came a faint sob, full of sorrow and grief. Emily stepped closer, trying to touch it, but the woman's hand passed through the cold air. That night, Emily felt a deep sadness and unspoken loss. Suddenly, the room's door slammed shut. Emily spun around, her heart nearly jumping out of her chest. "Don't be afraid, I am here," the old woman's voice whispered softly but clearly. That night, Emily realized that it wasn't just a ghost haunting this room, but a story wanting to be told. Yet as she tried to understand, the shadow vanished, leaving the room in a chilling silence. Emily sat in the corner of the room, trying to steady her still choked breath. The shadow of the crying old woman from last night was not just an ordinary ghost. There was something yet to be uncovered. That night, she turned on her flashlight and began examining every corner of the room, searching for anything that could explain why the spirit kept appearing. Behind an old, worn wardrobe, Emily found a locked wooden box. With trembling hands, she opened it and discovered several ancient letters and a black and white photo of a young woman with a small child. The letters told the story of Elizabeth Wilson, who had lost her child in a fire at the hotel in the early 20th century. Elizabeth wrote about her deep regret and her hope to meet her child again someday. Emily quietly wept. She felt connected to that tragic story and began to understand why the spirit longed so much. Suddenly, a loud knock sounded from behind the door. The atmosphere instantly tensed. Emily turned and saw a faint shadow standing in the doorway. Emily froze, her body stiff as the faint shadow stood in the doorway of room 217. Her heart pounded wildly, feeling as if it would burst from her chest. The dim light from the flashlight she held trembled, casting flickering beams on the creaking wooden floor and walls. The shadow didn't move, standing still with an indistinct form. Yet the cold aura emanating from it filled the entire room, making the air chill to the bone. Emily swallowed hard and tried to gather her courage. Who are you?" Her voice shook uncontrollably. The shadow slowly raised a hand, pointing toward the wooden box Emily had just found. Her heart raced even faster. It was as if the figure wanted to tell her something important, something she needed to understand. She lifted the wooden box in her hands and opened a letter she hadn't read yet. The letter was worn, yellowed, and fragile, but the handwritten message filled with sorrow was still clearly readable. "My beloved child, if you read this letter, I hope you are in a peaceful place. I miss you every day and hope someday we can meet again." Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She wiped away the tears that began to fall, but her fear did not fade. On the contrary, it swelled stronger. The shadow slowly retreated and a soft voice, almost like a whisper, echoed in her ear, "Don't be afraid. I just want peace." But as the shadow vanished, knocking sounds returned, louder and sharper this time. The noise came from inside the old wardrobe in the corner of the room. Emily approached cautiously and opened the creaking wardrobe door. Inside, she found a dusty old diary covered thickly in dust. She opened the first page and read handwriting that appeared to be Elizabeth Wilson's. The diary told of Elizabeth's last days as a chambermaid, about love and loss, about guilt that never faded. In her notes, Elizabeth wrote that there was something darker in the hotel, something she couldn't face alone. Emily realized that Elizabeth's story wasn't just about losing her child, but also about other lost spirits trapped inside the hotel. There was an entity far more dangerous, sometimes appearing as a faint shadow, sometimes causing strange sounds at night. Suddenly, the room's lights flickered and then went out. The atmosphere plunged into utter darkness, leaving only the faint glow of Emily's flashlight. In the darkness, she heard heavy breathing close by, as if someone, or something, was right behind her. Her heart pounding, Emily turned around, but saw only darkness and biting cold. Fear began to take hold of her, yet at the same time, a strong urge to stay and uncover the truth grew. This isn't just an ordinary ghost story, she thought. There's something bigger, something darker behind all this. Emily grabbed her phone and turned on an additional flashlight, trying to banish the darkness and the creeping fear. She knew tonight would be a long night filled with trials. Because at Hotel Stanley, room 217 didn't just hold stories of the past. It hid secrets not yet ready to be revealed. After the power went out, Emily stood frozen in the pitch-black darkness of room 217. Her breath was ragged, and the heavy breathing she had heard so close still echoed in her ears. But this time she refused to run or be afraid. She knew tonight had to be the end of all the mysteries that bound her. With trembling hands, Emily opened Elizabeth's diary she had found earlier in the old wardrobe. The flashlight on her phone illuminated the faded writings that flowed like messages from the past. On the last page, Elizabeth wrote about a way to free the trapped souls. A simple yet meaningful ritual that relied on sincerity and prayer. Emily understood that Elizabeth's spirit and the other spirits haunting the room meant no harm. They were only trapped in the in-between world, bound by pain and unspoken regret. Slowly, Emily rearranged the items in the room according to the instructions in the diary, lit the small candles from the wooden box, and silently prayed in her heart. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Shadows began to gather, but this time they were not frightening. They appeared clearer yet peaceful, as if waiting for liberation. Emily spoke the final words of the ritual with a steady voice, though her body trembled. "May the souls bound here find peace and rest in tranquility." The small candles flickered strongly, filling the room with light until the darkness vanished. The old woman's spirit who had haunted room 217 appeared once more, smiling gently at Emily. "Thank you," the soft voice seemed to float in the air. Then, one by one, the shadows disappeared, leaving the room in peaceful silence. Emily slumped down, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from fear but relief. She knew tonight she had completed something greater than just a ghost story. She had helped trapped souls find their way home. The next morning, Emily left room 217 feeling different. Hotel Stanley still stood grandly, but now no dark shadows cloaked that room. She smiled at the receptionist and said thank you. Though her experience had been intense and tense, she went home with a sense of peace. Her experience at Hotel Stanley became a lesson that sometimes, what we fear are not enemies, but those who simply want to be heard and understood.